The train whistle shrieked through the crisp Colorado air as Rebecca Adams struggled against the course ropes binding her wrists and ankles to the cold steel rails, her wedding dress now soiled with dust and tears. She had never imagined her wedding day would end like this, betrayed by the man she was supposed to marry and left to die on the tracks of the Denver Pacific Railway in 1875. The distant rumble of an approaching locomotive sent waves of terror through her body as she pulled desperately at her bindings, her screams carried away by the prairie wind. Xavier Wayland spotted the white figure on the tracks from half a mile away as he rode across the open plain. The seasoned cowboy spurred his chestnut stallion forward, the animal's powerful legs eating up the distance as the train's whistle grew louder. His hand instinctively moved to the hunting knife at his belt as he closed in on what appeared to be a woman in a wedding dress tied to the tracks. "Hold on," Xavier shouted over the approaching train's rumble, throwing himself from his horse and landing with practiced grace beside the terrified bride. Rebecca's tear-stained face turned toward him, hope flickering in her hazel eyes. "Please," she gasped, "help me." Xavier's knife sliced through the ropes with practiced efficiency. The train was now visible on the horizon, black smoke billowing from its stack. With seconds to spare, he scooped the woman into his arms and leapt clear of the tracks. The ground trembled beneath them as the locomotive thundered past, its whistle screaming in protest. They tumbled onto the scrubby grass, Xavier shielding her body with his own as the train cars rattled by. When the caboose finally disappeared around the bend, he helped her to a sitting position, his deep blue eyes meeting hers. "You're mine now," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the fading train. It wasn't a question or a demand, but a promise of protection. Rebecca stared at the rugged stranger, his sun-weathered face framed by dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. Her body trembled with adrenaline and fear. "Who are you?" she managed to ask. "Xavier Wayland," he replied, helping her to her feet. "Ranch foreman at the Triple Creek. And you're a bride who seems to have found herself in a heap of trouble." Rebecca smoothed down her tattered dress, dignity returning despite her ordeal. "Rebecca Adams, and I'm not a bride anymore, not after what Charles did." Xavier whistled for his horse, which trotted obediently to his side. "The man who tied you to those tracks, I reckon," she nodded, tears threatening again. "He wasn't the man I thought he was. After I discovered he was planning to steal my father's ranch once we were married, Her voice broke, Xavier's jaw tightened. "Miss Adams, I don't mean to be forward, but you need somewhere safe. My ranch is a half-day's ride from here. I can take you there, or to the nearest town if you prefer." Rebecca glanced back toward the tracks that had nearly been her deathbed. The sun was beginning to set, painting the plains in gold and amber. She had nowhere to go. Returning to her father's ranch would be the first place Charles would look for her. "Your ranch," she decided, accepting his hand as he helped her onto his horse. Xavier swung up behind her, his chest warm against her back as he reached around for the reins. "Hold tight, Miss Adams. It'll be dark soon, and we've got ground to cover." As they rode across the prairie, Rebecca felt something unexpected through her fear and exhaustion, a sense of safety in this stranger's arms that she'd never felt with Charles, despite their year-long courtship. The Triple Creek Ranch appeared on the horizon just as the last rays of sunlight disappeared behind the mountains. The main house stood sturdy against the darkening sky, lanterns already lit in the windows. Several outbuildings dotted the property, and a large barn housed the livestock. "It's not much," Xavier said as they approached, "but it's home." An older woman with silver-streaked hair emerged from the house as they dismounted. "Xavier Wayland, you're late for supper again," and she stopped short at the sight of Rebecca in her tattered wedding dress. "Good heavens, what happened?" "Mrs. Patterson, this is Miss Rebecca Adams. She needs a place to stay tonight." "Miss Adams, this is Mrs. Patterson, our housekeeper and the best cook in 3 counties. The older woman's eyes softened. "Come inside, child, let's get you cleaned up and fed." While Rebecca bathed and changed into borrowed clothes, Xavier explained the situation to Mrs. Patterson in hushed tones. By the time Rebecca joined them at the kitchen table, a hot meal of beef stew and freshly baked bread waited for her. Thank you, she said, suddenly realizing how hungry she was. I don't know how I'll ever repay your kindness. No need for that, Xavier replied, passing her the bread basket. Anyone would have done the same, Mrs. Patterson snorted. Not anyone, Xavier, now eat before it gets cold. Over the meal, Rebecca learned that Xavier had been running the Triple Creek since the owner, an elderly banker from Denver, had become too frail to manage it himself. Mrs. Patterson had been with the ranch for 20 years, taking care of the house and the men who worked the land. You're welcome to stay as long as you need, Xavier told her. We've got a spare room and you'll be safe here. That night, lying in a strange bed, Rebecca stared at the ceiling and replayed the day's events. How quickly life could change from bride to nearly dead to rescued by a handsome cowboy in the span of hours. She touched her wrists where the rope burn still stung, a reminder of Charles's betrayal. Sleep eventually claimed her, but her dreams were filled with train whistles and a pair of deep blue eyes. The next morning, Rebecca woke to the sounds of the ranch coming to life. Roosters crowed, cattle lowed in the distance, and men's voices called out to one another as they began their day's work. She dressed in the clothes Mrs. Patterson had provided, a simple blue dress that was slightly too large, and made her way to the kitchen. "Good morning, dear Mrs. Patterson greeted her, placing a cup of coffee on the table. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Rebecca admitted. "Is Mr. Wayland around?" "Xavier rode out at dawn to check on the north pasture. He'll be back for lunch." The older woman studied her. "He told me what happened yesterday." "That former fiancé of yours sounds like a real snake in the grass." Rebecca sighed. "I was blind to who he really was. My father warned me, but I wouldn't listen." "Men can be deceiving creatures," Mrs. Patterson said, cracking eggs into a bowl, "but not all of them. Xavier, for instance, he's solid as they come." After breakfast, Rebecca insisted on helping with the household chores. Working alongside, Mrs. Patterson gave her a sense of purpose and kept her mind from dwelling on her narrow escape. By midday, she had washed dishes, helped knead dough for the evening's bread, and was learning to make preserves from the summer berries. Xavier returned as promised, bringing with him a fresh-caught trout for lunch. He seemed pleasantly surprised to find Rebecca at ease in the kitchen, her cheeks flushed from the heat of the stove. "Miss Adams," he greeted her, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. "You're looking much better today. Please call me Rebecca," she said, "and thank you again for yesterday." "I've been trying to think of how I can repay you." Xavier shook his head. "Your company at lunch will be payment enough." Over the simple meal of fried trout and potatoes, Rebecca asked about the ranch and Xavier's life there. He spoke of his 10 years at Triple Creek, starting as a young ranch hand and working his way up to foreman. His voice carried pride when he described the improvements he'd made and the challenges he'd overcome. "What about family?" she asked. "Do you have any nearby?" A shadow crossed his face. "Lost my parents to cholera when I was 16. Been on my own since then, though Mrs. Patterson fusses over me like I'm still a boy." "Someone needs to," the housekeeper retorted from her place at the stove. Rebecca smiled at their easy banter. "I only have my father now. My mother passed when I was 12. Will you go back to him?" Xavier asked, his expression careful. Rebecca set down her fork. "I don't know. Charles might look for me there, and I've caused my father enough worry already, but I can't impose on your hospitality forever." "You're no imposition," Xavier said firmly. "Stay as long as you need to figure things out." That afternoon, Xavier showed Rebecca around the ranch. The Triple Creek sprawled across several hundred acres of prime grazing land, with 3 creeks providing water for the cattle and crops. The ranch hands tipped their hats respectfully as Xavier introduced her, though she caught the curious glances they exchanged. "They're wondering what a fine lady like you is doing here," Xavier explained as they walked back toward the house. "It's not often we get visitors, especially ones in wedding dresses." Rebecca laughed, surprising herself. "I must have been quite a sight yesterday." "You were," he agreed, his smile warm, "the most beautiful woman I've ever seen tied to railroad tracks." Their laughter faded into a comfortable silence as they watched the sun begin its descent. Standing beside this man she'd known for barely a day, Rebecca felt a strange sense of belonging she couldn't explain. The next day brought unwelcome news. One of the ranch hands rode in from town with supplies and a warning there was a man asking questions about a missing bride, offering a reward for information. "Charles," Rebecca whispered, fear returning. "He's looking for me." Xavier's expression hardened. "He won't find you here. None of my men would betray you for money. But I can't hide forever," she said, "and I need to let my father know I'm safe." Xavier considered this. "I'll ride to the telegraph office tomorrow. You can send a message to your father without revealing where you are." That night, Rebecca wrote and rewrote her telegraph message. How could she explain everything that had happened? In the end, she kept it simple. "Safe and well. Do not trust Charles. Will contact soon. Love, Rebecca." When Xavier returned from town the next day, his expression was grim. "Your Charles is persistent. He's convinced everyone you've been kidnapped, possibly by Indians. There are posses forming to search the territory." "He's trying to cover his tracks," Rebecca said. "If I'm found dead, he can claim it was kidnappers who killed me." "Well, he won't find you," Xavier assured her. "I sent your telegraph, and your father replied immediately. He's relieved you're alive and says to stay hidden." Over the next week, Rebecca settled into life at Triple Creek. She helped Mrs. Patterson with cooking and cleaning, learned to gather eggs without getting pecked, and even tried her hand at gardening. The work was harder than anything she'd done as a banker's daughter, but she found satisfaction in it. Xavier often joined her for evening walks around the property. Their conversations flowed easily, covering everything from books they'd read to their hopes for the future. Rebecca found herself looking forward to these walks, to the way Xavier listened intently to her thoughts and shared his own without pretense. "I never thought I'd find this kind of peace after what happened," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. Xavier's hand found hers, his touch gentle. "Sometimes the worst days lead us to the best ones." Rebecca looked at their intertwined fingers, then up at his face. The intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, Xavier leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft, questioning, and over too soon. "I'm sorry," he said, pulling back. "That was forward of me." "No," Rebecca whispered, her heart racing. "It wasn't." Their second kiss deepened, his hand cupping her cheek with tenderness that made her eyes sting with tears. When they finally parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since I found you on those tracks," he confessed. Rebecca smiled. "Even with my dress torn and my hair a mess, especially then," he said. "You looked like a warrior bride." The next morning, their newfound closeness was evident in the shy smiles they exchanged over breakfast. Mrs. Patterson raised an eyebrow but said nothing, though Rebecca caught her hiding a smile of her own. Their happiness was short-lived. That afternoon, a cloud of dust on the horizon announced riders approaching, at least 5 men on horseback, moving with purpose toward the ranch. "Get inside," Xavier told Rebecca, his voice tight. "Stay with Mrs. Patterson." Through the window, Rebecca watched as Xavier walked out to meet the riders, his posture relaxed but alert. Her blood ran cold when she recognized Charles Blackfield at the front of the group, his expensive suit replaced by riding clothes that couldn't hide his city-bred awkwardness. "I'm looking for my fiancé," Charles's voice carried clearly across the yard. "She was kidnapped on our wedding day. I have reason to believe she might be here." Xavier crossed his arms. "No kidnapped women here, mister, just ranch hands and our housekeeper." Charles dismounted, his boots raising dust as he approached Xavier. "Mind if we look around? She's a delicate woman, probably frightened out of her wits by now." "I mind very much," Xavier replied, not budging. "This is private property." "Unless you've got a warrant, I suggest you turn around and keep looking elsewhere." One of the men with Charles, the local sheriff, Rebecca realized, spoke up. "Mr. Wayland, we're just trying to find a missing woman. Surely you can understand our concern." Rebecca's hands tightened into fists. She couldn't let Xavier face them alone, not when she knew what Charles was capable of. Before Mrs. Patterson could stop her, she opened the door and stepped onto the porch. "I'm not missing," she said clearly, "and I'm certainly not kidnapped." Charles's face registered shock, then anger, then a calculated charm as he turned to face her. "Rebecca, darling, thank God you're safe. These men kidnapped you, didn't they? It's all right now. I've come to take you home." Rebecca descended the porch steps, keeping her distance from Charles. "The only person who tried to harm me was you, Charles. Or have you forgotten tying me to the train tracks after I discovered your plans to steal my father's money?" The sheriff looked between them, confusion evident on his face. "Miss, are you saying Mr. Blackfield here tried to kill you?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Rebecca replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He proposed marriage to gain control of my inheritance, and when I confronted him, he tied me to the Denver Pacific tracks and left me to die." Charles laughed, the sound brittle. "She's clearly been influenced by these people. Rebecca, think about what you're saying. Why would I try to kill the woman I love?" "You never loved me," Rebecca said. "You loved what my father's money could do for your gambling debts." The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "That's a serious accusation, Miss Adams." "When I can prove," she replied. "Check the telegraph office. My father will confirm Charles has been pressuring him to sign over property as a wedding gift. And these," she pushed up her sleeves to reveal the healing rope burns on her wrists, "these came from the ropes he used to tie me to the tracks." One of the posse members, an older man with a weathered face, spoke up. "I work for the railroad, Sheriff. There was a report of something on the tracks last week. Engineer had to emergency brake, said he thought he saw someone, but when they checked, there was nothing there." Charles's face darkened. "She's lying. This cowboy has turned her against me." Xavier stepped forward. "Sheriff, Miss Adams came to my ranch after I found her tied to the tracks. She's been here recovering from her ordeal. I have no reason to lie, but this man has every reason to want her silenced." The sheriff studied Xavier, then Rebecca, and finally Charles, whose composure was cracking under scrutiny. "Mr. Blackfield, I think you'd better come with me to sort this out. We'll send a telegraph to Miss Adams's father and get to the bottom of this." "This is absurd," Charles protested. "She's my fiancé." "Not anymore," Rebecca said firmly, "and I never will be again." As the sheriff and his men escorted a protesting Charles away, Rebecca felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Xavier came to stand beside her, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his strength. "You were brave," he said quietly. "I had someone worth being brave for," she replied, meeting his gaze. That evening, after the excitement had died down, Xavier and Rebecca sat together on the porch swing. The future still held uncertainties. There would be statements to give, perhaps a trial, but for now they had this moment of peace. "What will you do now?" Xavier asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Will you go back to your father's house?" Rebecca considered the question. The past 2 weeks had changed her in ways she was still discovering. "Eventually, I should visit him, but I don't think I want to live in town anymore." "No," Xavier's voice held a note of hope. "No," she confirmed, turning to face him. "I've found I prefer the open sky, the honest work, the simple pleasures of ranch life." Xavier's smile was slow and warm. "The Triple Creek could use someone with your spirit. Mrs. Patterson has been saying she needs help around the house." Rebecca laughed. "Is that the only reason you want me to stay? To help Mrs. Patterson?" His expression grew serious as he took her hands in his. "Rebecca Adams, when I found you on those tracks and cut you loose, something happened that I can't explain. When I said you're mine now, I meant I would protect you with my life. I didn't expect to fall in love with you so quickly, but I have. I know it's too soon to ask for promises." Rebecca silenced him with a kiss. "It's not too soon," she whispered against his lips. "Some things you just know." 3 months later, Rebecca stood in Mrs. Patterson's bedroom, examining her reflection in the mirror. The wedding dress was simple but elegant, nothing like the elaborate gown Charles had insisted upon. This one she had helped make herself with Mrs. Patterson's guidance, every stitch representing the new life she was building. Her father waited downstairs, having arrived the previous day from Denver. He had been skeptical about her new life and love at first, but seeing her happiness had softened his opposition. Charles was awaiting trial for attempted murder, his schemes exposed and his reputation in tatters. "You look beautiful," Mrs. Patterson said, arranging Rebecca's hair one last time. "Xavier won't know what hit him," Rebecca smiled. "I think he has some idea." The ceremony took place under the great oak tree near the largest of the 3 creeks. The ranch hands had built an arbor of twisted branches, decorated with wildflowers picked that morning. Xavier waited there, looking more handsome than Rebecca had ever seen him in his best suit, his normally unruly hair tamed for the occasion. As she walked toward him on her father's arm, Rebecca thought of the journey that had brought her here from near death on the train tracks to this moment of profound joy. Xavier's eyes never left hers as she approached, his smile growing with each step she took. When she reached him, he took her hands in his, just as he had that first day when he'd helped her onto his horse. "You're mine now," he whispered, echoing those first words, "and I'm yours." "Forever," Rebecca agreed, her heart full. 5 years later, Rebecca sat on the same porch swing, watching Xavier chase their 3-year-old son around the yard while their infant daughter slept in her cradle nearby. The Triple Creek had prospered under their joint care, expanding its operations and becoming one of the most respected ranches in the territory. Mrs. Patterson emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. "Those biscuits you made turned out perfect," she told Rebecca. "You've come a long way from that city girl who couldn't crack an egg without getting shell everywhere." Rebecca laughed. "I had a good teacher." They watched as Xavier scooped up little Thomas, the boy's squeals of delight carrying across the yard. "Your husband's a good man," Mrs. Patterson said. "One of the best I've known." "Yes," Rebecca agreed, her heart swelling with love. "He saved me in more ways than just cutting those ropes." Later that night, with the children asleep and the ranch quiet under a blanket of stars, Xavier and Rebecca stood on the porch, his arms wrapped around her from behind as they gazed at the night sky. "Any regrets?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Rebecca thought about the path her life might have taken if Charles had succeeded in his plot, or if Xavier hadn't happened to ride by at that exact moment. She thought about the elegant townhouse she might have lived in versus this sturdy ranch home filled with love and laughter. "Not a single one," she said, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. "Being tied to those tracks was the best thing that ever happened to me because it led me to you." Xavier's laugh was warm against her lips. "That's a mighty strange way of looking at attempted murder, Mrs. Wayland." "Perhaps," she agreed, "but it's true nonetheless. Every path led here, to this ranch, to these children, to you." As they walked hand in hand back into the house, they'd made a home. Rebecca knew with absolute certainty that sometimes the worst moments in life could lead to the greatest happiness if you were lucky enough to be rescued by someone who whispered, "You're mine now," and meant it as a promise of love, not possession. And Rebecca Adams Wayland had been that lucky indeed.